So my follow-up question is about dialogue or working with people who might have very different worldviews or ideology or perspective from you, and who might have very vigorous disagreements with some of the ideas in the kind of LGBTQ circle. And I'm just curious in terms of, and I really appreciate your kind of openness and willingness to have these dialogues and work with people who we probably don't see eye to eye with on many levels. And I'm just curious what a helpful or productive relationship or dialogue looks like with people, knowing that you're not going to agree on the content, right? Who may not agree about the, let's say, to phrase it this way, to who may not agree on the legitimacy of trans identity. Um, right. How do you go about having that relationship and still having something positive come out of it in spite of such a huge kind of fundamental difference?
Yeah. I tend to start with what we have in common, how we're similar, and I tend to not overemphasize. I tend to de-emphasize the conversation of gender or sexual identity, and really talk about the values that one shares. And organically, the concepts or the context of sexual orientation or gender identity will come up, but it's not the main emphasis of the dialogue. So in a sense, I come at it with the intention of having a dialogue, not a discourse. And so seeing, hearing, listening to the other person's point of view, instead of trying to have a counterpoint, I'll ask them, how has that served them having such a perspective? And then organically leading that into examples in their life. And I'll give it sort of an odd example of an interaction I had. I was on an Amtrak train headed from Tacoma back to Vancouver. And I was at one of the chairs where there was a table between the two seats. And I sat there so I could have my tablet out and check emails. And a gentleman sat across from me. He got on at the next stop. And so we had, quite a lengthy trip, and we talked about a lot of things about life and family and the weather and everything. And about 5 minutes before his stop, which was the one before mine, he immediately shifted his personality to talking about having things rammed down his throat. Gender and sexual orientation never was brought up in our conversation. We only talked about relationships and how we perceive life, maybe a little bit of politics, but basically the state of the world. And so he immediately shifted into talking about having things rammed down his throat, about gender and gender politics and sexual orientation. And so I was quite shocked by this sort of Jekyll and Hyde shift that happened as he stood up. And so he was in a position of dominance at that point. And I could see in his body he was becoming viscerally agitated. And so I asked him if he was okay. And he seemed agitated that I asked that question. And I said, well, it's obvious that you're about to get off the train. I send you lots of love for having a joyful life. And that was really confusing for him. He didn't know quite what to make of that. And so he looked at me sort of with a scowl. And then you saw a little softening, just a little bit of softening. He says, I don't know what to make of that. And then he left. And the woman that I saw that was across the way, she was seeing all of this unfold. And she said, what was that about? And I said, I guess you'll have to ask him. Because there's obviously a lot going on in him. And so I shared that with a friend of mine. She goes, did you talk about gender? I said, it never came up. Sexual orientation never came up. I mostly listened to him talk about his relationship with his wife. And so, did he know that I was part of the LGBT community? It probably occurred to him, or at least he made some, assumption about it, but it was never part of the conversation. So, having that space, giving that space for people to express however they are without resistance is the way to go, I feel.